So, have you ever walked through a contemporary art exhibition and just found yourself wondering why so much modern art feels intensely political, or, let's be honest, sometimes even deliberately confusing or just plain ugly? You know, it's a really far cry from the classic, beautiful paintings we usually picture when we hear the word art. Well, today we're diving into this explainer to figure out exactly why that is. We are going on a really fascinating analytical journey to uncover the hidden forces that are actively shaping our culture. We're going to trace the DNA of modern art all the way back to 19th century economic theory, watch how it morphed into state propaganda, and finally uncover how it actually shapes the media we consume every single day.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Marx's vision of art. 2. The evolution of aesthetics. 3. When art becomes propaganda. 4. The value of ugly art. 5. Media and educational bias. And finally, 6. The viewer as final checker. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Marx's vision of art, the base, and superstructure. To really understand why art so often challenges the system today, we first have to look at a guy usually associated with economics, and that's Karl Marx. But what's actually super interesting here is that Marx wasn't just a dry economic theorist. The guy was a massive literature nerd. I mean, he passionately loved Shakespeare, Goethe, ancient Greek poetry, the whole shebang. For Marx, art didn't just magically appear out of thin air. He believed it was deeply, fundamentally tied to the society that created it.
Marx basically divided society into two main layers. At the very bottom, you have what he called the base. Think of this as the economic structure, the technology, the class relations of a society. And built right on top of that sits the superstructure, which includes the laws, the religion, and yes, the art. According to the source material we're looking at, art is essentially just a reflection of that economic base. Marx argued that in a capitalist society, art becomes incredibly vulnerable. It gets turned into a mere commodity, just another thing to be bought and sold. The artist is no longer creating purely from a place of inner joy or inspiration. Instead, their work is dictated by cold market logic. Their labor, their deep creativity actually becomes alienated from them because, well, they just have to make a living.
Now, despite all that critique, Marx actually harbored this deeply utopian vision for human creativity. In a work called The German Ideology, he wrote that, "Today, everyone who paints is a painter, but in the society of the future, everyone includes painting among other activities." He imagined this future world where individuals literally weren't forced to be cogs in a machine, a world where you wouldn't be boxed into a rigid identity as just a painter in order to survive, but where you could simply paint purely for the absolute joy of expression, right alongside whatever else you wanted to do with your day.
Section 2, the evolution of aesthetics, divergent paths of Marxist art. Okay, so let's jump forward to the 20th century and see how this all builds. As capitalism evolved and entirely new technologies hit the scene, later thinkers took Marx's foundational ideas and adapted them. And this led to some entirely new, incredibly divergent paths of aesthetic theory. It's fascinating to map out how these vastly different interpretations actually played out. First up, we have Georg Lukács. He believed art should focus heavily on realism, meaning it should capture the complex whole picture of societal contradictions without hiding a single thing. Then, on a different track, we have Walter Benjamin. He was looking at new tech, stuff like film and photography, and he argued that these mass reproductions actually destroyed the elite one-of-a-kind aura of a piece of art. For Benjamin, this was a good thing. It transformed art into a democratic tool that the masses could use to critique society. But then, in stark contrast to both of those, the Soviet Union took these exact same Marxist ideas and completely warped them into a tool for pure state control. They created something called socialist realism, where art was strictly, rigidly dictated by the government to serve as positive propaganda, and they aggressively suppressed any avant-garde or experimental artists. So, the absolutely crucial point we arrive at here is the dual nature of modern art. It serves as a mirror reflecting society's deep and often really uncomfortable contradictions, but it simultaneously acts as a weapon to actually change those contradictions. This is exactly why modern art inherently evolved to critique the establishment. Think about it. When artists try to honestly reflect the whole picture of a flawed society, they automatically end up exposing the lies and injustices of the people in power. Section 3. When art becomes propaganda, the clash of traditions. But here's a really interesting question. What happens when you take this very Western concept of art as a weapon of critique, and you drop it into a culture with completely different foundational roots? Let's pivot for a second and look at this historical clash of traditions, specifically focusing on Japan. If we look at traditional Japanese art, things like ukiyo-e woodblock prints, no theater, or the tea ceremony, for literally 2,000 years, the entire goal was seeking harmony, aesthetic beauty, and providing a spiritual escape from the harsh, grueling realities of the daily world. But the Marxist view of art, which was imported from the West in the early 20th century, demanded the exact opposite. It sought to aggressively expose social contradictions and force people to confront reality head-on. Because this highly critical approach wasn't some organic evolution of Japanese tradition, but was instead a top-down, imported political tool, it really struggled to take root naturally. And tracing this timeline, we can clearly see the danger that followed. When art is used purely as an imported political tool, we see a very rapid descent straight into propaganda. Now, true critical art usually starts at stage 1, with an individual artist's genuine anger or unease at some social distortion. But propaganda? Propaganda skips that messy exploration phase entirely and jumps right to stage 2, imposing predetermined political answers. Suddenly, the art isn't asking the viewer questions anymore. It becomes a strict, rigid command for audience action. All the nuance completely dies and it gets replaced by a black and white good versus evil pamphlet.
Section 4. The value of ugly art, philosophy over entertainment. This brings us squarely into the modern era. Today, society has fully modernized, we've adopted incredibly complex systems, and it forces us to address one of the absolute most profound dilemmas of contemporary galleries everywhere.
I mean, seriously, ask yourself this. If art deliberately discards traditional beauty, if you walk into a gallery and the art is literally just a plumbing fixture, or maybe a room playing raw, uncomfortable noise, what is its actual value? Why do we even keep it around?
Well, the answer to that from the source is truly fascinating. Modern art essentially shifted from being visual entertainment to becoming a hardcore form of philosophy. After the unimaginable horrors of World War I and the Holocaust, a lot of artists realized that painting beautiful, perfectly harmonious pictures just felt like a massive lie. So they started using ugliness on purpose, to shatter our illusions, to upend what they called the cage of common sense. Uncomfortable art exists to share raw reality, systemic pain, and unresolvable contradictions that traditional, pretty beauty would only sanitize and hide from us. It's quite literally meant to wake us up.
Section 5. Media and Educational Bias, Systemic Complications. But here's where things get really complicated today. Let's pivot to the present and talk about the artist as the canary in the coal mine. You see, artists are highly sensitive creatures. They detect the toxic gases of society way before the rest of us even smell smoke. But remember, a canary is not a scientist. They can sense the danger, sure, but they don't necessarily have the objective data or the policy solutions to actually fix it.
And that intense sensitivity? It is highly exploitable. Mass media and social algorithms constantly hijack the emotional power of these artists. Media outlets can take an artist's subjective emotional cry and use it to basically overwrite objective facts. We see them cherry-picking specific artworks that conveniently fit their own political agendas or appease their corporate sponsors. And on social media, the deep, nuanced context of a piece is just entirely stripped away, turning a really complex artistic question into a cheap weapon designed to fuel endless online outrage.
And this exploitation even reaches deep into higher education. We see a really stark contrast between true critical art, which genuinely questions all systems and orthodoxies, and what we might call an institutional rebel pose. In a lot of art universities today, the curriculum has unfortunately morphed into an ideological echo chamber. Being anti-establishment is ironically the new required conformity. Students are often taught to adopt a critical rebellious pose not out of some genuine, raw realization, but simply because that's the ideology demanded by their professors and the international art market. It essentially becomes an unexamined orthodoxy all of its own.
Section 6. The viewer as final checker, navigating the landscape. Okay, so if the artist can sometimes be misguided, the media is manipulating their emotions for clicks, and educational systems are locked in echo chambers, where does that leave us? Well, it lands the ultimate responsibility and the ultimate power directly in your lap. You are the final checker.
Let's walk through 3 really actionable takeaways from the source to help you navigate this modern landscape. Step 1. Separate emotion from fact. When a piece of art or a media segment moves you to anger or tears, totally acknowledge that emotion, but don't blindly accept its underlying political claim as objective fact. Verify it yourself. Step 2. Spot the pose. Ask yourself, is this artist actually taking a genuine risk, or are they just making a really safe, fashionable critique to gain status in the art world? And step 3, vote with your wallet. Ignore the cheap, outrage-driven buzz on social media and deliberately support true craft, historical preservation, and art that possesses genuine, complex beauty.
We've seen how art evolved from simply reflecting economic structures to actively breaking our common sense, and we've seen just how easily it can be hijacked into propaganda or media manipulation. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. In a world where art and media are constantly trying to shape our reality, are you letting them do the thinking for you? Or are you ready to look at the world and the art within it with your own clear, critical eyes? Keep questioning.